There are truths so old, so profoundly embedded in the marrow of existence, that they become invisible, not because they are hidden, but because they are everywhere. These truths do not demand belief, they simply are. Yet, over the long, shadowed arc of human history, some of these truths have been torn from the fabric of collective memory, not by accident, but by design. They were whispered in stone temples now shattered, encoded in myths now dismissed, woven into rituals now forgotten. Among them lies one of the most profound, the ancient knowledge of the soul. To speak of the soul today is to risk trivialization. It has been softened, domesticated, turned into metaphor by those who fear its depth, or by those who do not remember its fire. But the soul is not a metaphor. It is the root system of your consciousness, the invisible scaffolding behind your breath, your longing, your fear of death, your unexplainable joy. It is the current that connects you to a sea far vaster than the life you can touch. Once, humanity knew this. In lands where night skies were understood as maps, not mysteries, and where the stars were red like the ink of the gods, the soul was not a belief. It was an experienced reality. The ancients did not ask whether we had souls. They asked how one could better align with it. They knew that the soul was not housed within the body, but rather that the body was a small lantern held within the vast cathedral of the soul. This reversal of perspective was everything. And so, their systems of medicine, architecture, timekeeping, governance, even warfare, were shaped not around profit or control, but around resonance. Resonance with the soul's rhythm, its purpose, its memory. Temples were built not for gods to dwell in, but to mirror the soul's ascent through stages of awakening. Music was not art for entertainment, but a coded language to realign you with your forgotten essence. Life was not merely something to survive or dominate. It was a crucible for soul remembering. But what happens when this knowledge becomes inconvenient? What happens when understanding the soul empowers the individual to such a degree that external authority begins to dissolve? What happens when a person who remembers their soul no longer obeys out of fear, but moves through life with inner clarity and luminous defiance? You silence that knowledge, you burn the scrolls, you slander the sages, you construct new myths, simpler ones with smaller gods and tighter chains. And so, across centuries, the great soul architecture of our ancestors was dismantled brick by sacred brick, until only fragments remained, echoes in mythologies, glimpses in dreams, symbols misfiled in dusty tomes. The erasure was not total, but it was enough. Enough to fracture our collective compass. Enough to turn our gaze downward, into material confusion. Enough to make us forget what we once knew, that we are not bodies seeking meaning, but meaning itself temporarily clothed in flesh. Without this orientation, we became wanderers in a house without doors, mistaking every mirror for an exit. And yet, the soul remembers. Even now, it waits beneath the noise of daily striving, beneath the clamor of identity and ambition. It waits in the tremble of silence before sleep. It calls in the ache that arises for no reason on a still afternoon. It lingers in the strange nostalgia for places you've never been, and in the piercing clarity of moments that vanish before you can name them. This is the echo of the forgotten, the erased, the ancient. There is no doctrine to be memorized here, no dogma to adopt. There is only a journey of remembering, of weaving back together the threads once torn apart. A journey not into the clouds, but into the architecture of your own being, where the soul has always waited, undiminished, behind the veil of modern forgetting. As we enter this exploration, be warned, this is not a mere intellectual exercise. To truly consider what was erased is to risk remembering what is still alive, and to remember is to be changed. To remember is to feel the warmth of an ancient fire rise in your chest, one that was always yours, even when you were told it never existed. To awaken to the ancient knowledge of the soul is not to learn something new. It is to peel away the sediment of centuries, to dislodge the cultural dust that has settled over something fundamentally eternal. What was erased was not information, but orientation. The soul was not merely a subject to be understood. It was the organ of knowing itself. And when a civilization loses its primary mode of perception, its understanding of everything else becomes distorted, like trying to navigate an ancient temple with a shattered compass and a flickering lamp. This lost orientation centered around a few guiding truths, principles so foundational that they were reflected in everything from temple geometry to the chants of mystics. At the heart of it all was the understanding that reality is layered, like concentric veils draped over a luminous center. The outermost layer, the physical world, is not the truest, but merely the most dense. Beneath it lies the emotional, the mental, the archetypal, and then the soul. Each layer thinner, more subtle, more real, not less, more. The soul was seen not as a possession, but as a movement, a verb rather than a noun. It was not something one had, but something one became. The soul was dynamic, a process of unfolding, like a seed remembering the oak hidden within it. And thus, human life was not a static identity to be maintained, but a sacred choreography. Each joy, betrayal, illness, or moment of wonder, a movement in the dance of becoming. Life was initiation, pain was passage, and death was not an end, but a return, a reabsorption into a greater field of being. To the ancients, the soul was holographic. It contained within it the entire pattern of the cosmos. You were not a speck in the universe, you were a mirror of it. This is the root of the Hermetic axiom. As above, so below. The stars were not just distant flames, they were extensions of your interiority. Dreams were not merely subconscious echoes, they were transmissions from soul realms. Even illness was seen not as a defect of flesh, but as a symbolic message, an encoded directive from the deeper intelligence within. Every movement of your life was a message, every circumstance a glyph. But here, in modernity, we reversed the map. We traded the language of metaphor and soul for measurement and surface. We no longer see symbols in sickness, meaning in coincidence, or sacred geometry in the movements of planets. We have dissected the universe until it lies lifeless in our hands, explained, but not understood. Our sciences can chart the brain's waves, but cannot fathom why the heart aches when a poem ends too beautifully, too soon. They can split atoms, but not explain why the sunset feels like an old friend, whispering something we forgot. This is the fracture. We became experts of the map and forgot how to walk the terrain. We are more informed, but less initiated, more connected, but less intimate. We have endless data, yet feel empty in the silence between our thoughts. We are trying to download transcendence through Wi-Fi signals, hoping a digital simulation can substitute for soul contact. But the soul is not found in pixels or analytics. It reveals itself in liminal spaces, in the quiet before dawn, in grief so deep it becomes luminous, in the eyes of someone who remembers who they are. And so the ancient frameworks are not obsolete, they are simply waiting. They were designed not as rigid dogma, but as orientation tools, astrolabes for the inner voyage. They do not ask you to believe, they ask you to notice the patterns that echo across your life, to notice the repeated lessons disguised in different costumes, to notice that perhaps the most important truths are those that feel like déjà vu. The soul speaks not in volume, but in resonance. When truth returns, it does not knock, it rings. But perhaps the most dangerous concept that was erased, because it was so liberating, was this: that the soul is sovereign. It is not the property of church, state, or biology. It bows to no external hierarchy. The ancients knew that to follow the soul was to risk breaking the rules of lesser men. It meant disobedience to the imposed order of things, not out of rebellion, but out of fidelity to a higher inner compass. This is why the knowledge was erased, because a society of soul-aligned beings cannot be controlled. They cannot be reduced to consumers, soldiers, or data points. They dream too loudly. They remember too much. And yet, even erasure cannot kill what is eternal. It only buries it. And what is buried may yet grow again, if the soil is cracked just right. Once upon a time, though not the kind of time you measure in hours or years, there was a garden. Not a garden with flowers or fountains, but a garden of consciousness. Each soul was a seed, and each seed carried a blueprint so vast, so luminous, that even the stars bent closer to watch them bloom. In this place, before forgetting, before the fall into linear thought and cemented dogmas, the soul remembered itself as part of everything, not part as in fraction, but part as in song, one voice in a cosmic symphony, distinct yet inseparable. The ancients told stories not to entertain, but to awaken. Every tale was a riddle, every myth a cipher. Take, for example, the story of Inanna descending into the underworld. To the casual listener, it's a tale of a goddess stripping away her adornments as she descends through 7 gates, only to confront death itself. But beneath the surface, it is a soul map. Each gate is a shedding of ego, of roles, of identity, until only essence remains. Her descent is ours, the slow unraveling of who we think we are so that we may remember what we've always been. And the underworld? It is not hell. It is the womb of rebirth, the soul's cocoon, or the Egyptian myth of the weighing of the heart. At death, the soul stands before Ma'at, and the heart is placed on a scale against a single feather. If the heart is heavier, the soul cannot pass. If it is light, it journeys on. Again, not a threat, but a metaphor. The feather is not judgment, it is truth. The heart weighed down by regret, by unlived truths, by betrayal of one's own essence. Such a heart is not punished, it is simply unready to rise. The ancient Egyptians were not obsessed with death. They were obsessed with right living, with living in alignment with the soul, so that death was not an end, but a continuation, a curve in the river's flow. And what of the phoenix? That ever-burning, ever-rising creature that crumbles to ash, only to be reborn in flame. It too is a soul symbol, one that speaks of the cyclical nature of transformation. In the old ways, crisis was not something to fear, but to enter consciously. The fire was not destruction, it was initiation, the burning down of false identities so that something more real could take root. The phoenix teaches what the soul already knows, that nothing truly essential can be destroyed. Only forms change, essence remains. These stories were not isolated. They appeared across continents, in cultures that had never touched one another by land or sea. And yet, the same symbols emerged: serpents shedding skin, labyrinths winding inward and outward, spirals reflecting the infinite unfolding of consciousness. Why? Because these stories came from the soul itself. They are not inventions, they are rememberings. And every true myth is a mirror. When you hear them, something stirs, not because it's new, but because it's ancient. The truth does not persuade, it resonates. Even the story of exile, the fall from Eden, the banishment from paradise, is not about punishment, but perception. Eden is not a location. It is a state of being where the soul lives in harmony with the whole. The expulsion is not a divine rejection. It is the moment we believed we were separate. That belief birthed every other wound. And yet, the gate to Eden was never locked. It only appeared to be closed because we turned our gaze away. The flaming sword at the gate, it is not there to keep us out. It is there to burn away the false before we re-enter. The ancients encoded their wisdom in story because the soul understands symbols better than syllables. A parable bypasses the intellect and touches the quiet knowing underneath. A tale can slip past the guards of the rational mind and plant something luminous in the heart. That is why so much of this ancient soul knowledge was carried in myth, in ritual, in symbol. Not because they were primitive, but because they were wise enough to know that the deepest truths cannot be spoken. They must be experienced, remembered, lived. And we, the inheritors of broken narratives, are being called to pick up the fragments, to see the soul behind the symbol, to listen to myths not as bedtime stories, but as instructions for awakening. The dragon is not your enemy, it is your power unclaimed. The labyrinth is not a trap, it is your path inward. The Holy Grail is not a cup, it is your own essence, long forgotten, waiting in the dark. Each of these narratives was never about gods fighting monsters or heroes crossing seas. They were about you, about what your soul must face, must surrender, must recover. They are the maps we've forgotten how to read. And yet, they remain, etched in ancient stone, in the rhythm of our dreams, in the ache we feel when something beautiful and wordless moves through us. To speak of myths and soul fire is one thing, to live by them is another. It is here, in the quiet trenches of daily life, that the ancient knowledge must land, like starlight descending into the marrow of a mundane world. The soul, for all its cosmic origins, does not hover above life. It inhabits it. It sings through laundry folded with care, decisions made in integrity, moments where we choose compassion when no one is watching. It is not an escape from reality. It is reality made sacred. But how does one live soulfully in a world that has forgotten the soul? The answer does not lie in discarding the modern world, but in re-enchanting it. This is not a call to retreat into fantasies or delusions, but to restore meaning where it has been hollowed out. Begin not with grand gestures, but with perception. See your life as a symbolic terrain. The job you dislike, the relationship that drains you, the illness that lingers. What if these were not obstacles, but soul signs? What if your external circumstances were reflections of internal misalignment, echoing through the mirror of matter? When we shift into this lens, we cease asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and instead begin asking, "What is this inviting me to see?" Living with this awareness is not abstract, it is surgical. You begin to feel when something, though logical, is not true for you. You sense when a decision is misaligned, even if it pleases others. You notice when your words fracture your own integrity. The soul does not shout, it whispers, and it speaks most clearly in stillness, which is why the modern pace is poison to the ancient way. To reclaim this knowledge, one must learn to pause, not endlessly, but often enough to hear what lies beneath the static. In this reclamation, suffering takes on a new shape. It is no longer a punishment or random misfortune. It becomes a curriculum. Pain becomes the compass pointing toward unreconciled parts of the self. Loneliness is not just the absence of others. It is the cry of the soul, asking to be remembered. Even anxiety, when seen rightly, is the friction of a life lived against one's own nature. To live practically with the soul is to take these emotional states as data, not defects. One of the most radical realignments this knowledge brings is the shift from external validation to internal resonance. The soul does not operate through popularity or permission. Its guidance may lead you to paths that are unconventional, solitary, or misunderstood. And yet, when followed, these paths radiate a deep peace that no approval can replicate. This is not romanticized rebellion, it is courageous coherence. And in a world engineered for distraction and conformity, coherence is revolutionary. What does this look like in tangible terms? It might mean leaving a career that pays well, but starves your spirit. Not out of recklessness, but out of reverence. It might mean refusing to betray your intuition in relationships, even if it means being alone. It might mean dedicating time each day, not to productivity, but to communion, to silence, to listening, perhaps even to ritual, not as superstition, but as sacred structure. Lighting a candle with intention, walking without a destination, writing letters to the version of yourself that remembers. Practical integration also means learning to see others as soul beings, even when they forget it themselves. The angry customer, the dismissive boss, the estranged family member, they too are fragments of the same wholeness. This does not mean tolerating harm, but it does mean perceiving beneath masks. Judgment softens into discernment. Defensiveness becomes curiosity. Conflict becomes an opportunity for reflection rather than warfare. This is not passivity, it is depth. And depth changes everything. Living from the soul is not about perfection. It is about orientation. You will still falter. You will forget. You will choose fear some days and ego on others. But you will know. And this knowing, even when small, changes the texture of your life. You begin to notice patterns unraveling. You begin to feel time differently, not as a threat, but as a canvas. You begin to trust the unfolding, not because it is painless, but because it is true. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to realize that your own healing is not separate from the healing of the world. The same structures that erased the soul in history continue to erase it now, through systems of control, through narratives of lack, through technologies that reduce consciousness to algorithms. To live from the soul is not just personal, it is political, it is ecological, it is ancestral, it is resistance in the most sacred form, the refusal to forget. This integration is not a finish line, it is a turning, a remembering that happens not once, but over and over, in each breath, in each choice, in each act of courage, no matter how small. And the more you live this way, the more the ancient knowledge stops being ancient. It becomes alive. It becomes yours. It always was. There is a moment, fleeting yet eternal, that arrives in the quiet after deep recognition. A hush falls across the inner landscape, like the world holding its breath. You realize, not as theory, but as visceral certainty, that something sacred has survived. Beneath the rubble of distraction, ideology, and time, the soul endures, undiminished, unbroken, and still whispering. What was erased from history was never destroyed, only buried, waiting to be remembered not in books or sermons, but in you. This ancient knowledge was never meant to be locked in temples or guarded by the few. It was a living inheritance, woven into the breath of trees, the curvature of galaxies, the rhythm of your heartbeat. You were never meant to be a stranger to it. You were born with it, born of it, and the forgetting. That too was part of the larger unfolding, the great spiral of descent and return. Just as the tide pulls back before it rises, so too did we fall asleep, only to wake again, wiser, stronger, stripped of illusion. The soul is calling, not like a voice echoing down a hallway, but like a warmth rising in your chest, a knowing that pulses behind your ribs. It does not beg or command. It invites. It invites you to remember your original name, the one not given by parents, but by stars. It invites you to move not through survival, but through devotion. It calls you to remember that your life is not a problem to solve, but a poem to live. You stand now at the threshold, not of belief, but of being. This is not about adopting ancient doctrines. It is about embodying ancient truth. Truth that says you are not a fragment, but a fractal of the whole. That your pain is not weakness, but initiation. That your longing is not a flaw, but a compass pointing home. And that home was never a place, but a state of alignment with the soul. This path is not easy. It will unmake you, but it will also remake you into something more essential, more awake. You may lose identities, comfort, certainty, but what you gain cannot be taken away. It is the light in your bones, the echo of eternity behind your eyes, the unshakable calm that arises when you are finally in rhythm with your own becoming. Let the world keep spinning in its noise, its algorithms, its illusions of power. You are not here to conquer that world. You are here to illuminate it, to walk as one who remembers, to speak as one who carries something old, something true, something luminous. You are not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be stoked. And when you live this way, you do not just heal yourself, you become a torch for others, lost in the fog of forgetting. So let this be your moment of turning. Let this be the place where history ends and memory begins. Let this be the breath where you stop asking if the soul is real, and instead listen for its voice within you. Let this be your return, not to what you were told, but to what you have always known. Because the soul is not a theory, it is not an artifact, it is not a metaphor, it is you, and it's time to come home.